Hi, I'm Claire. I was 7 years old when they told me my father died in a training accident at Fort Benning. 29 years later, I was cataloging Gulf War veteran records when I saw his handwriting on a pension form dated 3 weeks ago. The ink was still fresh. My mother answered her phone on the second ring and said, "You were never supposed to find that." Then the line went dead, and I realized my entire childhood had been a lie. Have you ever discovered that the people closest to you built your whole life on a foundation of deception? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in the National Archives satellite office hummed with the kind of persistent drone that makes you forget what time of day it is. I'd been stationed at the same metal desk for 6 hours, surrounded by towers of file boxes that smelled like old paper and government bureaucracy. My job as an independent research consultant wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept me close to the thing I loved most, uncovering stories that had been buried under layers of time and intentional forgetting. That afternoon, I was working on a project for a documentary filmmaker who wanted background on Gulf War veterans from the Pacific Northwest. Standard stuff, really. Service records, deployment dates, commendations, the paper trail that follows every soldier through their career and sometimes beyond. My coffee had gone cold an hour earlier, sitting in a chipped mug next to my laptop. The taste of stale French roast lingered on my tongue, bitter and familiar. Outside the narrow window, Portland rain streaked the glass in diagonal lines, turning the street below into a watercolor blur of headlights and brake lights. Rush hour had started without me noticing. I rolled my shoulders, feeling the knots that came from hunching over documents all day, and reached for the next folder in the stack. The label read Donovan, Victor J., and my hand froze halfway to the box. My father's name was Victor Donovan. But that couldn't be right. There had to be dozens of Victor Donovans who served in the military. It was a common enough name. Still, my heart rate picked up as I opened the folder, telling myself I was being ridiculous. The service number was different from the one I'd memorized as a child, the one etched on the folded flag they'd given my mother at the funeral I barely remembered. The birth date was off by 3 years. Relief started to settle over me, the kind that comes when you realize you've been holding your breath over nothing. Then I saw the signature on the pension disbursement form. It wasn't just similar to my father's handwriting. It was identical. The way the V looped into the I, the sharp downward slash of the D, the compact spacing between letters that came from years of filling out military forms in cramped spaces. I'd spent my childhood studying that signature on the single birthday card I'd kept, the one he'd sent me months before he died. I knew every curve and angle. This wasn't a coincidence or a similar style. This was his hand, his pen pressure, his rhythm. The date at the top of the form was from last month. October 15, 2024. I sat back in the metal chair so hard it squeaked against the linoleum floor. The sound echoed in the empty research room, too loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over my thoughts. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and opened the Photos app, scrolling back years until I found the picture of that birthday card. I'd digitized it when I turned 18, some sentimental need to preserve the last piece of him I had. I zoomed in on the signature and held it next to the pension form. Perfect match. The room felt colder suddenly, like someone had opened a window to let in the October wind. But all the windows were sealed shut, the kind that don't open in federal buildings. I read the form again, slower this time, looking for any detail that would make this make sense. The address listed for direct deposit correspondence was in Bend, Oregon. The form had been notarized at a UPS store 3 weeks ago. There was a phone number written in blue ink at the bottom, added by hand in that same unmistakable script. My father had died in 1995. I was 7 years old, second grade, Mrs. Patterson's class. I remembered my mother picking me up early from school, her eyes red and swollen, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. I remembered the funeral, though most of it was a blur of black clothes and people touching my head and telling me I was being so brave. I remembered the flag, the way the soldiers folded it with such precise movements, like origami made of fabric and loss. I remembered my mother's sister, Aunt Carol, staying with us for 2 weeks, cooking meals we barely ate and speaking in hushed tones on the phone about arrangements and benefits and how tragic it all was. I remembered the story we were told. Training accident at Fort Benning, Georgia. A routine exercise that went wrong. My father, Staff Sergeant Victor Donovan, had been 29 years old. He'd served 6 years, 2 deployments, decorated for his service in the Gulf. He was preparing for a potential 3rd deployment when it happened. Quick, they said. He didn't suffer. They always say that, don't they? As if the speed of death somehow makes it easier for the people left behind. But here, in my hands, was evidence that Victor Donovan was alive. That he'd been alive for 29 years. That he'd been signing pension forms and collecting benefits and living in Bend, Oregon, less than 3 hours from where I sat. I photographed every page of the file with trembling hands. The service record, the deployment dates, the pension forms going back years. Not just weeks. Years. I scrolled through the dates and felt something crack open inside my chest. 1997, 2001. 2008, 2015. 2022, regular as clockwork, every few months, a new form. A new signature. My father's signature. The archive office closed at 6. I barely noticed the security guard politely clearing his throat behind me until he did it a second time, louder. I packed up in a daze, shoving my laptop and notes into my bag with none of my usual care for organization. The rain had intensified when I stepped outside, immediately soaking through my jacket. I didn't bother opening my umbrella. The cold water felt appropriate somehow, like the physical world was finally matching the ice that had formed in my stomach. My apartment was a 10-minute drive, but I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I could make myself start the engine. The pension form was still open on my phone screen, casting a pale glow in the dark interior of my Subaru. I zoomed in on that phone number again. 10 digits. Area code 541. Central Oregon. Bend. I could call it. Right now. Press the buttons and see who answered. See if a voice I hadn't heard in 29 years would come through the speaker, older and weathered but unmistakably his. My thumb hovered over the screen. Instead, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and warm the way it always was when she didn't know what was coming. Claire, honey, I was just thinking about you. How's the research project going? I found something today, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too flat and too controlled. In the military records. Oh. The warmth had cooled slightly, edged with something cautious. What kind of something? A pension disbursement form for Victor J. Donovan. Filed last month. Signed 3 weeks ago. I paused, listening to the silence on the other end of the line. With Dad's signature. The silence stretched longer. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. In the background, I heard what sounded like a glass being set down hard on a counter. Claire. Her voice had changed completely, stripped of all pretense. You were never supposed to find that. What does that mean? I asked, but I already knew. Somewhere deep in my bones, I'd known the moment I saw that signature. Mom, what does that mean? It means you need to stop digging into things that don't concern you. Her words came out clipped and hard. It means some doors are closed for a reason. He's alive. I wasn't asking. My father is alive, and you've known this whole time. It's complicated, Claire. You don't understand the circumstances. You don't understand what he did, what he was, why we had to. She cut herself off. I can't have this conversation over the phone. Then let's have it in person. My hand was gripping the phone so hard my fingers ached. I'm coming to Tacoma this weekend. Saturday morning. We're going to sit down and you're going to explain to me how you let me grow up believing my father was dead. Claire, please. The hardness cracked, and underneath it was something I'd never heard in my mother's voice before. Fear. Please just leave this alone. For your own good. For everyone's good. Saturday morning, I repeated. 10 o'clock. I'll be at your house. I ended the call before she could respond and sat in the dark car, rain drumming on the roof, staring at nothing. My hands had stopped shaking. That first shock had burned through and left something else in its wake, something colder and more focused. I'd spent my entire adult life helping other people uncover their histories, tracing paper trails and connecting dots that had been deliberately scattered. I'd helped children find birth parents, helped families locate veterans who'd disappeared into the system, helped historians piece together narratives that had been fragmented by time and bureaucracy. Now it was my turn. I drove home on autopilot, barely registering the familiar turns and stoplights. My apartment was on the third floor of a converted warehouse, the kind of place with exposed brick and too high ceilings that made it expensive to heat in winter. I'd chosen it because of the wall-to-wall bookshelves I'd installed myself, floor to ceiling, filled with research materials and reference books and the kind of esoteric volumes that only made sense to someone who spent their life digging through archives. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I dropped my bag on the couch and went straight to the filing cabinet in my home office. The bottom drawer held my personal documents, the ones I rarely looked at but couldn't bring myself to digitize and delete. Birth certificate. Social security card. College diplomas. And underneath all of that, a manila folder labeled simply, Dad. I hadn't opened it in years. Maybe a decade. Inside was the birthday card, now brittle with age, the envelope it came in with my childhood address written in his blocky print. A newspaper clipping from the local paper about his death, 3 paragraphs that said almost nothing. The program from his memorial service, cheap cardstock with a grainy photo of him in uniform on the front. A few photographs my mother had let me keep. And the folded flag. I spread everything out on my desk under the bright LED lamp and started comparing. The signature on the birthday card matched the pension form exactly. But there were other things too, details I'd forgotten. The way he formed numbers, the particular slant of his capital letters. I found an old letter he'd sent from deployment, discovered at the bottom of the folder. The handwriting matched. The pension forms weren't forgeries. They were real. Which meant the death had been the forgery. I opened my laptop and started searching. It took less than an hour to find the address associated with the pension deposits. Property records were public information, and the owner of a small cabin on the outskirts of Bend, Oregon, was listed as V. J. Donovan. The property had been purchased in 1996, a year after his supposed death. I pulled up satellite images. It was isolated, surrounded by pine forest, accessible by a long gravel road. The kind of place someone would choose if they wanted to disappear. My phone buzzed with a text message. My mother. Please don't come on Saturday. I'm begging you. Let sleeping dogs lie. I didn't respond. Instead, I called the one person I knew who might be able to help me understand what I'd stumbled into. Colonel Frank Hastings had been a reference contact for a project I'd worked on 2 years ago, a documentary about PTSD in Gulf War veterans. He was retired now, living in Seattle, but he'd served during the same period as my father. He'd been generous with his time then, patient with my questions, willing to explain the parts of military culture and structure that didn't translate well to civilian understanding. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice gruff with sleep. It was past 11. I'd lost track of time. Colonel Hastings, this is Claire Donovan. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need your help with something urgent. There was a pause, then I heard rustling like he was sitting up. Claire. I remember you. The researcher. What's going on? I need to know if you ever served with a Victor Donovan. Staff Sergeant, deployed to the Gulf in the early 90s. Would have been stationed at Fort Lewis before that. Another pause, longer this time. Victor Donovan. His voice had changed, become more guarded. Why are you asking about him? Because he's my father. Because I was told he died in 1995 in a training accident. And because I just found pension records that say he's still alive. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Hastings spoke, his words careful and measured. "Claire, if you found what I think you found, you need to be very careful about who you talk to and what you do next." "You knew him," I said. It wasn't a question. I knew him. Good soldier. Smart. But there were circumstances. Things that happened during deployment that made his situation complicated when we came home. "I can't talk about this over the phone." He paused. "Can you come to Seattle? Tomorrow?" "Yes," I said immediately. "Come to the VA hospital. Main campus. Ask for me at the front desk. 2:00. And Claire? Don't tell anyone else what you found. Not until we talk." The call ended, and I was left staring at my reflection in the darkened window. Behind me, spread across my desk, was the documented evidence of a life that had supposedly ended before I'd learned to ride a bike without training wheels. In front of me was the rain-soaked city where I'd built my adult existence, completely unaware that the foundational story of my childhood had been a fabrication. I thought about that 7-year-old girl, sitting in the back of a church, holding her mother's hand, watching soldiers fold a flag with nothing underneath it but a lie. I thought about all the Father's Days I'd spent feeling that particular brand of grief that comes from absence, the phantom limb pain of a parent who was supposed to be there and wasn't. I thought about the college applications where I'd written about loss and resilience, the therapy sessions where I'd unpacked my abandonment issues, the relationships I'd sabotaged because some part of me had learned early that the people you love can vanish without warning. All of it built on a story that wasn't true. I picked up the birthday card, the last thing he'd sent before he died. Except he hadn't died. He'd just stopped sending cards. The message inside was simple, written in that same precise handwriting. "Happy 7th birthday, Claire Bear. Be brave, be kind, be smart. Love always, Dad." I'd read those words 1,000 times, looking for hidden meaning, for some premonition that he'd known he was about to leave. Now I read them again and saw something different. Not a goodbye. An instruction manual. As if he'd known he was about to disappear and wanted to leave me with something to hold on to. Be brave. Be kind. Be smart. "Okay, Dad," I thought, staring at the words until they blurred. "Let's see if you taught me well enough to find out why you've been gone for 29 years while still cashing your pension checks 3 hours away from where I sleep." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk with a fresh legal pad and started building a timeline. On the left side, everything I'd been told about my father's death. On the right, everything I was now discovering. The gap between the two columns was 29 years of deception, and I needed to understand how deep it went. The official story had always been simple. Training accident, Fort Benning, March 1995. Closed casket funeral because the injuries were too severe. My mother had been stoic through the whole thing, accepting condolences with a tight smile and dry eyes. I'd thought she was being strong for me. Now I wondered if she'd been relieved. I pulled up every digital record I could access from my laptop. Military databases I had research credentials for, public records, property transfers, anything with his name attached. The trail went cold in 1995, exactly as it should have if he'd died. But then there were these small threads, easy to miss if you weren't looking. A fishing license issued in Deschutes County in 2003. A vehicle registration for a 1989 Ford pickup, transferred to A.V. Donovan in Bend in 1998. A library card application from 2010. Tiny pieces of a life that had continued in shadow. At 4 a.m, I found something that made my stomach drop. A marriage certificate. Victor James Donovan and Catherine N. Fletcher, filed in Deschutes County, dated June 1997. 2 years after his death. He'd remarried. He'd stood in front of an officiant and pledged himself to someone else while I was 9 years old, still sleeping with the lamp on because I was afraid of the dark without him. I stared at the certificate until the words stopped making sense. Then I searched for Catherine Fletcher Donovan. Her trail was easier to follow. She taught elementary school in Bend. 3rd grade. There were photos from school events, staff directories, a Facebook page with strict privacy settings but a public profile picture. She was maybe 10 years younger than my father would be now, with short gray hair and a warm smile. In one photo, she was holding a sign that said, "Welcome back students," in front of a classroom decorated with paper leaves. My father had built a new life. A complete life. While my mother told me he was gone forever. The rage hit me then, sudden and white-hot. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward and hit the bookshelf. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to drive to Tacoma right now and demand answers from my mother, or better yet, drive to Bend and show up on his doorstep and ask him what the hell gave him the right to disappear like I'd never existed. Instead, I grabbed my running shoes and went out into the dark streets of Portland. The rain had stopped, leaving everything slick and reflective under the streetlights. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, until the rage had burned down to something I could carry without it consuming me. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sky was beginning to lighten, that gray pre-dawn that comes before sunrise. I showered, changed into clean clothes, and made coffee that I actually drank this time. Then I packed a bag for Seattle. The drive would take 3 hours. I'd be early for my 2 o'clock meeting with Colonel Hastings, but I didn't care. I needed to be in motion. I needed to be doing something other than sitting in my apartment, staring at evidence that my entire childhood had been a performance. The drive north on I-5 was familiar enough that I could do it on autopilot. I'd been to Seattle dozens of times for research projects and archive visits. But today, the city felt different as I crossed the bridge over the Columbia River, leaving Oregon behind. I was driving toward answers that I wasn't sure I wanted, toward a truth that was going to reshape everything I thought I knew about where I came from. I stopped at a diner in Olympia for breakfast I couldn't taste and coffee I didn't need. The waitress was chatty, asking where I was headed, if I was visiting family. I told her I had a meeting in Seattle and left it at that. How do you explain to a stranger that you're about to learn why your dead father isn't actually dead? You don't. You smile and leave a good tip and get back in your car. The VA hospital campus was massive, sprawling across several blocks of Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. I parked in the visitor lot and sat in my car for 10 minutes, watching people come and go. Veterans of all ages, some in wheelchairs, some using canes, some who looked perfectly healthy on the outside but probably carried invisible wounds. My father should have been one of these people. Instead, he was a ghost who paid taxes. I went inside at 1:30, too restless to wait any longer. The front desk receptionist was a young guy with kind eyes and a name tag that said Marcus. I told him I was there to see Colonel Hastings, and he made a quick phone call, then directed me to the 3rd floor, room 312. I found Hastings waiting in what looked like a private office, though the nameplate on the door was someone else's. He was older than I remembered, his hair completely white now, but he stood straight and moved with the same precise economy of motion that marked all the career military people I'd interviewed over the years. He shook my hand firmly and gestured to a chair across from a small table. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," I said. "I'm glad you called." He sat down across from me and folded his hands on the table. "But before we start, I need to know exactly what you found and who else knows about it." I told him everything. The pension forms, the signatures, the property in Bend, the marriage certificate. I showed him the photos I'd taken of the documents. He studied them carefully, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he sat back and was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your father didn't die in a training accident. You probably figured that out already. So what happened?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "What happened is complicated, and some of it I can't tell you because it's still classified. But I can tell you the parts that matter to you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your father was involved in an operation during his second deployment that went sideways. People died. There were investigations, accusations, questions about what orders were given and who followed them. By the time we came home, Victor was looking at the possibility of a court-martial. I felt cold. What did he do? He followed orders that turned out to be based on bad intelligence. Civilians were killed. It was a mess, and the army needed someone to take the blame. Hastings's jaw tightened. Victor was a good soldier. He did what he was trained to do. But politics and optics don't care about that. The brass wanted the story to go away, and the easiest way to make it go away was to make him go away. They faked his death. It wasn't a question. They gave him a choice. Face court-martial, prison time, dishonorable discharge, or take a new identity and disappear. Witness protection, essentially, but military version. He'd get his pension, a new life, but he could never contact anyone from his old life again. That included you. That included your mother. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. And my mother knew? Hastings nodded slowly. She was briefed. She had to agree to the arrangement. The official story was the training accident. You got the flag, the benefits, the sympathy. He got to live, but as someone else. She chose this. The words came out flat. She chose to tell me he was dead rather than let me know he was alive somewhere. I can't speak to her reasons. But I can tell you that the arrangement was supposed to be permanent. He wasn't supposed to file for pension under his real name. Someone screwed up in the records department, or maybe he got tired of hiding. Either way, the paper trail exists now, and you found it. I stared at the table, processing. All those years of grief, of missing him, of wondering if I'd said or done something wrong in those last few weeks before he died. All of it unnecessary. All of it a choice someone else had made for me. Does he know about me? I asked quietly. Does he know what I'm doing, where I live, anything? I don't know. The terms of his arrangement forbid contact, but that doesn't mean he hasn't kept tabs from a distance. I honestly don't know, Claire. I found a marriage certificate. Catherine Fletcher. He remarried. Hastings didn't look surprised. He was allowed to build a new life. That was part of the deal. A real life, not just hiding in a cave somewhere. New name on paper, new identity, but he could exist in the world. Under Victor Donovan. His real name. That doesn't make sense if he was supposed to disappear. No, it doesn't. Hastings frowned. That's what concerns me. Either the protection program was sloppier than it should have been, or he made choices that deviated from the plan. Either way, it means the situation is more complicated than a standard witness protection case. I pulled out my phone and showed him the address in Bend. He's here. 3 hours from where I've been living my entire adult life. Did you know that? I knew he was in Oregon somewhere. I didn't know where exactly. We weren't supposed to stay in contact, but over the years, I heard things through the veteran network. Rumors. Someone matching his description. But I never confirmed it. I need to see him. The words came out before I'd fully formed the thought, but once I said them, I knew they were true. I need to hear from him why he chose this. Why he let me believe he was dead. That's your right. But Claire, you need to understand that showing up could have consequences. If there are people who still care about keeping his old life buried, stirring this up could bring attention he can't afford. And it could bring danger to you. I don't care. I met his eyes. I've spent 29 years grieving someone who was alive the whole time. I deserve answers. Hastings studied me for a long moment, then nodded. You're right. You do. But let me make some calls first. Let me see if I can find out what the current status of his situation is, whether the protection order is still active, whether there's anyone who might cause problems if you make contact. Give me 24 hours. I'm going to Tacoma tomorrow morning to confront my mother. I want her to tell me face to face why she lied. Be careful with that. She made choices I can't defend, but she made them under extraordinary circumstances. Military intelligence officers can be very persuasive when they want someone to cooperate. Are you defending her? No. I'm giving you context. What you do with it is up to you. He stood and pulled a card from his wallet. This is my personal cell. Call me after you talk to your mother. I should have more information by then. I took the card and stood as well. My legs felt unsteady, like I'd been sitting for hours instead of 45 minutes. Colonel Hastings, can I ask you something? Of course. Did you think he made the right choice? Disappearing instead of fighting? He was quiet for a moment, his expression troubled. I think he made the only choice he could live with. Whether it was right, I don't know. But I do know he loved you. Before all of this happened, he talked about you constantly. Showed pictures to anyone who'd look. You were his whole world, Claire. Whatever he chose, it wasn't because you didn't matter. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I thanked him and left, walking back through the hospital corridors in a daze. By the time I reached my car, it was raining again, that persistent Seattle drizzle that seeps into everything. I sat in the parking lot and called my Uncle Larry. My mother's brother had always been part of the story, helping with arrangements after my father's death, staying close to us in those early years. If anyone else knew the truth, it would be him. He answered on the first ring. Claire, your mother called me. She said you found something you weren't supposed to find. So you knew too. I kept my voice level. All these years, you knew he was alive. It wasn't my secret to tell. Your mother made me promise. I'm coming to Tacoma tomorrow. 10 o'clock. I want you there too. I want everyone who lied to me in the same room when I hear the truth. Claire, please. You don't understand what was at stake. Then help me understand. Tomorrow. 10 o'clock. Be there, Uncle Larry. I ended the call before he could argue. Then I started the car and began the drive back to Portland. I had one more night to prepare for the confrontation that would either give me answers or destroy what was left of my relationship with my mother. The rain followed me south, and somewhere around Longview, I started crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears of adult grief, but the ugly, choking sobs of a 7-year-old girl who just learned her father was never coming home. Except now I knew he could have. He'd chosen not to. And somehow that was worse than death. I pulled off at a rest stop and sat in the parking lot until I could breathe again. Through the windshield, I watched families coming and going, kids running ahead of their parents, everyone moving through their normal lives while mine was splitting open like a fault line. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please let me explain tomorrow. I didn't respond. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't give me back 29 years. Sorry didn't explain why she'd looked me in the eye every Father's Day and let me lay flowers on an empty grave. I got back on the highway and drove home through the dark, the road ahead lit only by my headlights and the distant glow of Portland on the horizon. Tomorrow I'd get answers. Tomorrow I'd confront the people who'd stolen my father from me. Tonight, I just needed to get home, to my books and my research and the orderly world I'd built for myself, before everything changed forever. When I finally pulled into my apartment parking garage, it was past midnight. I was exhausted but wide awake, my mind racing through scenarios and questions and imagined conversations. I climbed the stairs to my apartment slowly, my bag heavy on my shoulder. There was an envelope taped to my door. Plain white, no postmark, no return address. Just my name written in handwriting I recognized immediately, even though I hadn't seen it in 29 years except on archived documents and pension forms. My father had been here. At my apartment. Today. My hands shook as I pulled the envelope free and unlocked my door. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I set it on my kitchen counter and stared at it while my heart hammered in my chest. Whatever was inside would be his words, his explanation, his side of the story. Once I read it, there would be no going back to the version of reality I'd had yesterday. I made tea I didn't drink. I paced my apartment. I looked out the window at the city lights and wondered if he was still out there somewhere, watching, waiting to see if I'd read what he'd written. Finally, I picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. The message was short. Claire Bear. I know you found the records. I know you have questions. I can't make you understand, but I can try to explain. There's a diner in Sandy, Oregon, called the Birdhouse Cafe. I'll be there Sunday morning at 8. If you want answers, I'll be waiting. If you don't come, I'll understand. Either way, I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I ever did, and not a day has passed that I haven't thought about you. Be brave. Dad. I read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and set it on the counter. Sunday was 2 days away. First, I'd face my mother. Then I'd decide whether I was ready to face him. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I already knew what I'd choose. I'd spent my entire adult life uncovering truths that other people wanted to keep buried. I wasn't going to stop now, even if the truth was about my own life. Especially if it was about my own life. I would go to Tacoma tomorrow and hear what my mother had to say. Then I would drive to Sandy on Sunday morning and meet the ghost who'd been haunting me since I was 7 years old. And one way or another, I would finally understand why the people who were supposed to love me had decided that lying was easier than truth. Saturday morning came too quickly. I stood in my apartment at 6:30, already dressed, already packed, staring at the note my father had left. The paper was slightly wrinkled now from how many times I'd unfolded and refolded during the night. Each time I read those words, "Be brave," I felt something twist inside me. Easy for him to say. He'd had 29 years to prepare for this moment. I'd had less than 48 hours. The drive to Tacoma felt longer than it should have. Traffic on I-5 was light for a Saturday, but every mile stretched out like I was moving through molasses. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say a dozen times, but the words kept rearranging themselves in my head, losing their force. How do you confront someone who raised you, who tucked you in at night and made your breakfast and held you when you cried, about a betrayal this fundamental? My mother's house sat on a quiet street in North Tacoma, a craftsman-style home with a manicured lawn and flower boxes that were always perfectly maintained. I'd grown up in a different house, smaller, closer to the base. She'd bought this one 10 years ago after retiring from her job as a school administrator. It was the kind of house that said stability and respectability, 2 things my mother valued above almost everything else. I parked on the street and sat in my car for a moment, looking at the blue front door with its brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. Through the front window, I could see movement. She was home. Probably watching me sit here, gathering courage. When I finally walked up the path and rang the doorbell, she opened it immediately. She'd been waiting right there. My mother looked older than I remembered from my last visit 3 months ago, lines deeper around her mouth, shadows under her eyes. She was dressed carefully, slacks and a cardigan, her gray hair pulled back in a low bun. Battle armor disguised as casual Saturday wear. Claire. Her voice was soft, almost tentative. Come in. I stepped into the foyer, and the smell hit me immediately. She'd baked cinnamon rolls, my favorite breakfast from childhood. The scent was supposed to be comforting, I realized. She was trying to soften me before we even started talking. The manipulation of it made my jaw clench. Uncle Larry was already there, sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee that he wasn't drinking. He stood when I entered, looking like he wanted to hug me, but something in my expression made him sit back down. Thank you for coming, my mother said, gesturing to the couch. Can I get you coffee? Something to eat? I don't want coffee. I want answers. I stayed standing. I want you to tell me why you let me grow up thinking my father was dead when he's been alive this entire time, living 3 hours away, signing pension forms, remarried, building a whole life while I mourned him. She flinched at the word remarried. You know about Catherine. I know a lot of things now. I know about the incident in the Gulf. I know about the witness protection arrangement. I know he had a choice between court-martial and disappearing. What I don't know is why you agreed to it. Why you chose to lie to me every single day for 29 years instead of telling me the truth. My mother moved to the armchair across from the couch and sat down slowly, like her joints hurt. It wasn't that simple. Then make it simple for me. Explain it so I can understand how a mother looks at her 7-year-old daughter and decides that fabricating a death is better than honesty. Uncle Larry cleared his throat. Claire, the people who came to your mother, they weren't giving her options. They were telling her how it was going to be. Nobody held a gun to her head, I shot back. She could have said no. She could have fought for him. She could have at least told me the truth when I was old enough to understand. And put you at risk? My mother's voice rose slightly. The situation your father was in, the people involved, they made it very clear that the only way to keep everyone safe was complete separation. No contact, no knowledge, no breadcrumbs that could lead anyone from his old life to his new one. If I'd told you, if you'd known, you could have become a liability. A liability. I repeated the word like it was foreign. I was 7 years old. I was your daughter. You were both. She pressed her fingers to her temples. God, Claire, do you think this was easy for me? Do you think I wanted any of this? Your father and I had problems, yes, but I never wanted him gone. I never wanted you to grow up without him. But you had problems. I latched onto that admission. What kind of problems? She was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. The kind that come when someone brings the war home with them and can't leave it outside. Your father came back from his second deployment different. Angry. Paranoid. He'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced someone was in the house. He couldn't hold a normal conversation without scanning exits and checking sight lines. I tried to get him help, but he refused. Said he was fine. Said I was overreacting. That's PTSD, I said. That's treatable. That's not a reason to fake someone's death. No, but it's context for why, when the military came to me and said he'd done something that could land him in prison for 20 years, part of me was relieved. She looked up at me, and her eyes were wet. I was relieved, Claire. Because it meant he'd be away from us, and maybe you'd get to grow up in a house that didn't feel like a minefield. I'm not proud of that. I've carried the guilt of that relief for 3 decades. But that's the truth you wanted. The admission hung in the air between us. I'd expected a lot of things from this conversation, but not that raw honesty. Not the acknowledgement that she'd been relieved to see him go. So you sacrificed him to make your life easier, I said quietly. I sacrificed him to keep you safe and give you a normal childhood. Her voice hardened. And if you think that was easy, if you think I didn't spend every birthday, every Christmas, every Father's Day wondering if I'd made the right choice, then you don't know me at all. Uncle Larry stood up. Maybe we should all take a breath here. Stay out of this, Larry. I didn't look at him. You were part of the lie too. You helped her stage that funeral. You looked me in the eye at the cemetery and told me Dad was a hero who died serving his country. He was a hero, Larry said firmly. What happened in the Gulf, the incident they tried to blame him for, it was a command failure. Bad intelligence, unclear orders, impossible situations. Victor did what he thought was right in the moment. The army needed a scapegoat, and he was convenient. So yes, I helped your mother give him a funeral with honors instead of letting him be dragged through a court-martial and labeled a war criminal. I'd make the same choice again. Even if it meant lying to me? Especially because it meant lying to you. Larry's voice softened. Claire, you were 7. You were innocent and trusting and so proud of your dad. We could either let you keep that pride and grow up believing he was a good man who died honorably, or we could tell you the truth and watch you grow up knowing he was being accused of killing civilians and hiding from prosecution. Which childhood would you have chosen? I had no answer for that. Because he was right, in a horrible way. 7-year-old me couldn't have processed the complexity of war crimes and military politics and witness protection. 7-year-old me needed simple stories with clear heroes and villains. They'd made me the hero's daughter instead of the accused child. But I wasn't 7 anymore. When did you find out he was in Bend? I asked my mother. When did you know he was that close? She looked away. About 5 years after he disappeared. I got a letter from an attorney, no return address, letting me know he was settled and safe. The postmark was from Oregon. I looked into it, quietly. Found the property records. I knew where he was. And you never told me. Even when I moved to Portland for college. Even when I took a job 40 minutes from where he was living. You never once thought I deserved to know. Every time I thought about telling you, I remembered the threats. The people who arranged his disappearance made it very clear that if any of us broke the agreement, the protection would be revoked. He'd be vulnerable. We'd be vulnerable. I couldn't risk it. Who were these people? Give me names. Give me something concrete instead of vague threats about unnamed military intelligence officers. My mother shook her head. I can't. I signed documents. Non-disclosure agreements. If I violate them, there are legal consequences. Then you're still choosing them over me. I grabbed my bag from where I'd set it by the door. After everything, you're still protecting the people who forced this situation instead of your own daughter. Claire, wait. She stood quickly. There's more you need to know before you do whatever you're planning to do. I'm planning to meet him. Tomorrow morning. He left me a note with a time and place, and I'm going. Her face went pale. He was here. At your apartment? Apparently the dead can travel when they need to. Claire, listen to me. If you meet with him, if you make contact, you could undo the protection that's kept him safe all these years. There are people who still care about that incident in the Gulf. People with long memories and powerful connections. If word gets out that Victor Donovan is alive and accessible, it could trigger a chain of events none of us can control. Maybe it's time for those events to happen. Maybe the truth is more important than whatever comfortable lies everyone has been living with. Uncle Larry moved between me and the door. At least talk to Colonel Hastings again before you do anything. Let him advise you on the safest way to make contact. He already told me to be careful. I heard him. But I'm done letting other people's fears dictate my choices. I stepped around Larry and opened the door. I've spent 29 years being careful, being safe, being the good daughter who didn't ask too many questions. That ends now. Claire, please. My mother's voice cracked. I know you hate me right now. I know you think I'm a monster. But everything I did because I love you. Even the lying. Especially the lying. I turned back to look at her, this woman who'd raised me and lied to me in equal measure. Love isn't supposed to come with this much deception attached to it. Love is supposed to trust. You didn't trust me with the truth, and now you want me to trust your judgment about what's safe. I can't. I won't. I walked out before she could respond, down the path to my car, away from the house that had always felt like home and now felt like a crime scene. Behind me, I heard the door close, not slammed but shut firmly. Final. The drive back to Portland should have felt like escape, but it didn't. It felt like I was suspended between two impossible moments, the confrontation I'd just survived and the one waiting for me tomorrow morning. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I pulled over at a rest stop near Centralia and called Colonel Hastings. He answered immediately. Claire. I was hoping you'd check in. How did it go with your mother? About as well as you'd expect. She admitted everything. The arrangement, the threats, the relief she felt when he disappeared. She also said there are still people who care about keeping the Gulf incident buried. People who might cause problems if I make contact. She's not wrong about that. I made some calls yesterday. Your father's situation is more delicate than I initially thought. The original protection order is technically still active, though it's been mostly forgotten by the current administration. But there are a few old-timers in military intelligence who were directly involved in the cover-up. If they find out he's been living under his real name, filing pension claims, existing in the open, they might decide to tie up loose ends. Tie up loose ends how? Best case, They revoke his pension and identity documents, force him to relocate again. Worst case, they decide he's a security risk and handle him accordingly. You mean they'd kill him? I said it flatly, testing whether he'd contradict me. He didn't. It's not outside the realm of possibility. These are people who arranged civilian deaths and blamed them on ground soldiers to cover their own mistakes. They have a lot to lose if the truth about the Gulf incident comes out now, especially with current political tensions around military transparency. I closed my eyes and leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. So what am I supposed to do? Pretend I never found out? Go back to my normal life and forget that my father is alive? I'm not telling you what to do, Claire. I'm giving you information so you can make an informed choice. If you meet with him, do it carefully. Don't announce it. Don't document it. Don't leave a trail that anyone monitoring his situation could follow. And be prepared for the possibility that this one meeting might be all you get. He's remarried. He has a life in Bend. How has he stayed under the radar this long if these people are so vigilant? My guess? Small-town obscurity and bureaucratic incompetence. He's in a place where nobody's looking, filing paperwork that nobody checks closely. He's been lucky. But luck runs out, especially when someone starts pulling threads. Someone like me. Someone like you. His voice was gentle. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to prepare you. If you want to know your father, if you need that closure or that connection, then go meet him. But understand that it comes with risks for both of you. Thank you for being honest. I straightened up in my seat. I'm going to meet him. Tomorrow morning. I need to hear from him directly why he made the choices he made. Then take precautions. Drive a different route than you'd normally take. Check for anyone following you. Don't use your credit cards in Sandy. Pay cash. Turn off your phone's location services. Basic operational security. You're talking like I'm in a spy movie. You're talking to a man who's been alive, and the people who want him dead have resources you can't imagine. Better to be paranoid and safe than casual and sorry. We ended the call, and I sat in my car watching families come and go from the rest stop. A mother chasing a toddler who'd escaped from her grasp, both of them laughing. An elderly couple holding hands as they walked slowly back to their RV, normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that a few parking spaces away, someone was planning to meet a ghost and possibly blow up what was left of his carefully constructed invisibility. I pulled back onto the highway and drove the rest of the way to Portland in silence, no music, no podcasts, just the sound of my own breathing and the hum of tires on pavement. When I got home, I did exactly what Hastings had suggested. I mapped out 3 different routes to Sandy, choosing the one that avoided highways and cameras as much as possible. I withdrew $300 in cash from an ATM. I charged my phone fully and made a note to turn off location tracking before I left. Then I went through my filing cabinet and pulled out every document I had related to my father. Birth certificate, marriage license to my mother, his military service record, the death certificate. I scanned everything and uploaded it to a secure cloud drive with a password only I knew. If something went wrong tomorrow, if I disappeared or if he disappeared, at least there would be a record that Victor Donovan had existed, had been real, had mattered. Night fell, and I made dinner I couldn't eat. I tried to read and couldn't focus. I tried to sleep and lay awake staring at the ceiling, playing out scenarios. What would I say when I saw him? How would he look after 29 years? Would I recognize him? Would he recognize me? I was 36 now, no longer the little girl he'd left behind. I'd lived an entire life, made choices, built a career, become a person he'd never known. Same age you'd be in a few years. He closed his eyes. I followed my orders. My team followed theirs. But someone up the chain needed a scapegoat, and I was convenient. Junior enough to be expendable, senior enough to be credible as the person responsible. So they offered you the deal. Disappear or face court-martial. They didn't offer. They told me. I had 48 hours to decide if I wanted to spend the next 20 years in Leavenworth or if I wanted to take a new identity and vanish. They made it very clear that if I chose the court-martial, they'd make sure I was convicted. They had testimony lined up, documents ready, a whole narrative that put everything on me and my supposedly poor judgment. What about the truth? What about fighting it? Claire, you work in archives. You know how history gets written. The truth matters less than who controls the narrative. They had the power, the resources, the institutional backing. I had nothing except the certainty that I'd followed orders and done what I was trained to do. That doesn't hold up in military court when the brass wants someone's head. I wanted to argue, to insist that justice would have prevailed, but I'd seen enough buried documents and suppressed records to know he was probably right. The system protected itself. Always had, always would. So you ran. You took the deal and disappeared and left me to grow up believing you were a hero who died in service. I took the deal because the alternative was worse. If I'd fought it, if I'd gone to court, the story would have become public. You would have grown up as the daughter of a convicted war criminal. Every time someone Googled your name, you'd be connected to that. Every job interview, every relationship, every moment of your life would carry that weight. So you made the choice for me. You decided what I could handle. I decided to give you a chance at a normal life. Was that wrong? Maybe. Probably. But it's what I chose, and I can't undo it now. He leaned forward, his voice urgent. Claire, you have to understand the position I was in. They told me that if I took the deal, they'd classify the whole incident. It would disappear from the record. You and your mother would get full survivor benefits, a clean story, honor guard at my funeral. If I fought it, everything would come out. The investigation, the accusations, the civilian deaths. Your mother would lose her job, her security clearance. You'd both be marked. Mom said she was relieved when you left. That you came back from deployment different, angry, impossible to live with. Something shifted in his expression, a flash of pain quickly controlled. I wasn't easy to be around. The things I saw, the things I did, they changed me. I tried to keep it together for you, for her, but it was hard. Some days I couldn't remember how to be the person I'd been before. Your mother deserved better than what I was able to give her at the end. She also said you had problems before the deal. That maybe part of her was okay with you being gone. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee. We had problems. I won't pretend we didn't. The marriage was already strained. Maybe if I'd gotten help, if I'd admitted I needed therapy instead of trying to push through it, things would have been different. But I was trained to be strong, to handle things, to not show weakness. That training served me well in combat and destroyed me at home. The waitress appeared again, asking if we wanted to order food. I shook my head. My father ordered eggs and toast he probably wouldn't eat. When she left, I pulled out the envelope with my letter and set it on the table between us. I wrote this last night. Everything I wanted to tell you over the years. I don't know if I'm going to read it to you or if I'm going to keep it to myself. But I needed you to see that it exists. That there are 29 years of words I never got to say. He looked at the envelope like it might bite him. Can I ask what it says? It says that I needed you and you weren't there. It says that I became who I am despite your absence, not because of it. It says that I'm angry and hurt and confused, and I don't know if I can forgive you. I paused. It also says that some part of me still loves you, and I hate that part of myself for it. His eyes were wet when he looked up. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me anything. I just wanted you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and if I could go back and find another way, I would. But you can't. And here we are. Here we are. The eggs arrived, and we both ignored them. Outside the window, Sandy was waking up properly now. People walking dogs, families heading to the park down the street, normal Sunday morning routines. I wondered what it would have been like to grow up in a place like this, small and quiet, with a father who came home every night. Different. Easier, maybe. Or maybe just different problems. Tell me about Catherine, I said abruptly. Your wife. The one you married while I was in 3rd grade. He flinched. How did you find out about that? Public records. Marriage certificate filed in Deschutes County, 1997. 2 years after you supposedly died. Did you tell her about me? Does she know you have a daughter you abandoned? She knows. I told her everything before we got married. The incident, the deal, the family I left behind. She deserved to know who she was marrying. And she was okay with it? She was fine with building a life with someone who'd walked away from his 7-year-old daughter? She understood the circumstances. She knew I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You chose self-preservation over me. That's a choice. I felt the anger rising again, hot and sharp. What does she do? What's her life like? She teaches 3rd grade. She's kind and patient and everything I don't deserve. We have a quiet life. Small. Simple. Nothing like the one I had before. Do you have other children? The question hung between us like a grenade. He shook his head slowly. No. We talked about it, but I couldn't. The idea of having another child when I'd already abandoned one, it felt like a betrayal. Like I'd be replacing you. How noble. The sarcasm dripped from my words. You drew the line at replacement children but not at replacement wives. That's not fair. None of this is fair. You don't get to lecture me about fairness when you've been living a comfortable life in Bend while I've been dealing with the aftermath of your choices. I leaned back against the booth, suddenly exhausted. Colonel Hastings told me that making contact with you could put you at risk. That there are still people in military intelligence who care about keeping the Gulf incident buried. His face hardened. Frank Hastings talks too much. He talks enough. Is it true? Are there still people watching you? I don't know. Maybe. For the first 10 years, I was careful. Paranoid, even. Checked over my shoulder constantly, varied my routines, kept a low profile. But nothing happened. Nobody came. Eventually, I started to relax. Started living like a normal person instead of someone in witness protection. Maybe that was stupid. Or maybe they forgot about you because you didn't matter enough to keep tracking. Maybe. He picked up his fork and pushed eggs around his plate. Or maybe me filing pension claims under my real name for the past few years caught someone's attention, and they're just waiting for the right moment to act. Why did you do that? Why use your real name if you were supposed to have a new identity? Because I got tired of hiding. Tired of being someone else. Victor Donovan died in 1995, but somehow he's still here, still breathing, still taking up space in the world. Using my real name felt like claiming something back. Stupid, probably. But honest. I understood that impulse more than I wanted to admit. The need to be seen, to be known, to have your real name attached to your existence. I'd built my whole career on making sure people's real stories got told, not the sanitized versions that made it into official records. There are documents, I said carefully. Evidence of what really happened in the Gulf. I know because I've seen enough military archives to know how things get classified and buried. If I wanted to find that evidence, I could. And if I found it, I could make it public. He went very still. Why would you do that? Because the truth matters. Because you and everyone else involved deserve to have the real story told. Because hiding what happened doesn't make it go away, it just lets the people responsible escape accountability. Claire, if you go digging into that incident, if you try to expose what really happened, you'll put yourself in danger. The people who arranged my disappearance, they're still powerful. Still connected. They won't let you unravel their cover-up without consequences. I'm not afraid of consequences. I've spent my entire adult life dealing with consequences of decisions other people made. Maybe it's time to make some decisions of my own and let other people deal with the fallout. You're talking about revenge. That's not the same as justice. Maybe I'm talking about both. I met his eyes. You got to choose how you disappeared. You got to decide what story got told about you. I never got that choice. Everything about my life has been shaped by decisions other people made. My mother, you, unnamed military officers, all of you deciding what was best for me without asking what I wanted. I'm done with that. I'm done being passive. So what are you going to do? I'm going to find the evidence. I'm going to document what really happened in the Gulf. And then I'm going to decide whether to expose it or keep it locked away. My choice this time. Not yours. Not the military's. Mine. He was quiet for a long time, studying my face. You look like your mother when you're angry. Same expression. Same fire in your eyes. Don't change the subject. I'm not. I'm just noticing that you became who you are despite everything. You're strong and principled and stubborn as hell. That's all you, Claire. Nothing I did or didn't do made you that way. You're right. You don't get credit for who I became. But you do get responsibility for the holes you left behind. The diner door opened, and a family came in, loud and cheerful, breaking the tension. Kids arguing about pancakes, parents negotiating, normal family chaos. We both watched them for a moment, and I wondered if he was thinking the same thing I was. That could have been us. Should have been us. A normal family with normal problems, not this fractured thing held together by lies and decades of silence. I have files, he said quietly, watching the family settle into a booth across the restaurant. Documentation from my own investigation into what happened. I didn't just accept the deal and forget about it. I spent years gathering evidence, interviewing people who were there, building a case that would prove I wasn't responsible. I never did anything with it because I couldn't without exposing myself, but it exists. If you want to pursue this, if you really want to uncover the truth, I can give you everything I have. My pulse quickened. Why would you do that? If I expose the truth, your cover is blown. Your quiet life in Bend evaporates. Maybe I'm tired of the quiet life. Maybe I'm tired of hiding. Or maybe I just want to give you something that matters, some way to make up for all the years I wasn't there. He reached across the table, hesitated, then pulled his hand back. I can't give you back your childhood. I can't undo the damage. But I can give you the tools to find the truth you're looking for. After that, what you do with it is up to you. Where are these files? At my house. In Bend. Catherine knows about them. She's been after me for years to do something with them, to stop carrying the weight alone. Maybe it's time to let someone else carry it for a while. I thought about Colonel Hastings's warnings, about my mother's fear, about the careful life I'd built researching other people's histories instead of confronting my own. I thought about the little girl who'd stood at a grave marker with her mother's hand on her shoulder, believing the lies because she had no reason not to. I thought about who I'd become in spite of everything, and who I might still become if I was brave enough to choose it. I want the files, I said. All of them. Everything you have. He nodded. I'll get them to you. But Claire, before you decide to do anything with them, I need you to understand something. The truth you're looking for, it's not going to be clean. It's not going to make anyone look good, including me. What happened in that compound, the orders I followed, the split-second decisions, there's no version of that story that ends with everyone being vindicated. War is messy. Command failures are messy. The truth is messy. I work in archives. I know messy. I can handle it. I hope so. Because once you see those files, once you know everything, you can't unknow it. And it might change how you see me. It might make things worse instead of better. Things are already worse. They can't get much more broken than they already are. I stood up, pulling money from my pocket to pay for the coffee I'd barely touched. Give me your phone number. The real one, not whatever's on those pension forms. I'll contact you when I'm ready to get the files. He pulled out his phone, an old flip model that probably couldn't track location or connect to the internet. He wrote his number on a napkin with a pen from his pocket, that same careful handwriting I'd memorized from childhood. I took the napkin and folded it into my wallet. Claire. He stood too, and we faced each other across the booth. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, no claim to any of your accomplishments, but I am. You're remarkable. Don't. My voice came out harder than I intended. Don't try to be my father now. You had your chance for that, and you gave it up. We're not family anymore. We're just two people with a complicated history, and maybe we can figure out how to move forward from here, but it won't be as father and daughter. That ship sailed 29 years ago. He flinched but nodded. I understand. I walked out of the diner without looking back, into the bright Sunday morning that felt nothing like the dark confrontation I'd just survived. My hands were shaking as I got into my car, and I sat there for a full 10 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. Through the diner window, I could see him still sitting in the booth, head in his hands, looking like a man who'd finally run out of ways to hide from his past. I pulled out my phone and called Colonel Hastings. He answered immediately. How did it go? He has files. Documentation about the Gulf incident. Evidence that could prove what really happened. Hastings was quiet for a moment. Claire, be very careful with this. If you start pulling on those threads, there will be people who notice. People who won't be happy about it. I know. But I'm going to do it anyway. I need to know the truth, and if the truth causes problems for people who've been hiding it for 30 years, that's their problem, not mine. You're more like your father than you probably want to hear. Everyone keeps saying that like it's supposed to mean something. I'm nothing like him. He ran. I'm staying and fighting. Fighting is the easy part. Knowing when to stop fighting, that's harder. Just promise me you'll be smart about this. Document everything. Make copies. Tell people you trust where you're going and what you're doing. Don't become another person who disappears because they asked the wrong questions. I promise. I started the car. Thank you, Colonel. For everything. Stay safe, Claire. And call me if you need help. Any kind of help. The drive back to Portland passed in a blur. My mind was racing through scenarios, possibilities, dangers. I had a choice in front of me that felt impossibly large. Take the files, investigate the truth, possibly blow up what was left of my father's carefully constructed life and put myself at risk in the process. Or walk away, let sleeping dogs lie, continue my quiet life researching other people's histories while ignoring my own. But I'd never been good at walking away from hard questions. That's what made me good at my job. That's what made me dangerous to people who wanted the past to stay buried. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd made my decision. I would get the files. I would investigate. I would find out exactly what happened in that compound in the Gulf and who was really responsible. And then I would decide what to do with that information. Not for my father. Not for my mother. Not for the military or the cover-up or anyone else. For myself. For the 7-year-old girl who deserved to know why her father disappeared. For the 36-year-old woman who deserved to understand where she came from and why her life had unfolded the way it had. The truth was mine to uncover. And whatever came after, I would face it with my eyes open. 3 days later, I drove to Bend with an empty backpack and a recording device charged to full. My father had texted me an address and a time, nothing more. The house was smaller than I'd imagined, tucked into a quiet street lined with pine trees, the kind of place where neighbors probably knew each other's names but respected boundaries. Catherine answered the door. She was shorter than me, with kind eyes that assessed me carefully before she stepped aside. She didn't introduce herself, just pointed toward a room at the back of the house where I could hear papers rustling. My father had 3 cardboard boxes stacked on a desk, each one labeled with dates. He looked up when I entered, and something passed between us that wasn't quite reconciliation but wasn't hostility either. Understanding, maybe. Or just exhaustion. Everything's here, he said. Witness statements, radio transcripts, photographs, command documents I shouldn't have but managed to copy. The evidence that proves the orders came from battalion level, not from me. The proof that the intelligence was faulty and that someone higher up knew it before we went in. I opened the first box and started photographing pages. Hours passed. Catherine brought coffee and sandwiches we barely touched. The documentation was thorough, obsessive even. My father had spent years building an airtight case that he'd never been able to use. When I finished, I had thousands of images on my phone and a clearer picture of what had happened. The incident wasn't a single bad decision. It was a cascade of failures, political pressure, and commanders willing to sacrifice ground soldiers to cover their mistakes. My father had been the designated fall guy in a system that prioritized appearance over accountability. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked as I packed up. "I don't know yet. But I'll figure it out." I paused at the door. "Thank you for trusting me with this. You're the only person I could trust with it." His voice was quiet. "Whatever you decide, I'll live with it. I've been living with worse for 30 years. Back in Portland, I spent 2 weeks organizing the evidence, cross-referencing documents, building a timeline that was indisputable. Then I made copies. One set to Colonel Hastings. One set to a lawyer who specialized in military justice. One set locked in a safe deposit box with instructions to release it if anything happened to me. The final set I kept at home, spread across my desk like a map of someone else's war that had become mine. I called my mother on a Tuesday afternoon. She answered warily. "I have the evidence," I told her. "Everything about what really happened in the Gulf. I know you were afraid of what would happen if the truth came out, but I need you to understand something. I'm going to pursue this. I'm going to make sure the right people are held accountable. And I need to know if you're going to support me or fight me." She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I was trying to protect you." "I know. But I don't need protection anymore. I need you to trust that I can handle the truth and its consequences. What if you get hurt? What if they come after you the way they went after him? Then I'll deal with it. But I won't live my life afraid of what might happen if I ask the wrong questions. That's not who I am." Another pause. "You really are his daughter." "Maybe. But I'm also my own person. And this is my choice to make." When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "Then I support you. Whatever you need, however I can help, I'm here. I should have been here all along." It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. But it was a start. The investigation took 6 months. I worked with journalists, military lawyers, and veterans advocates to build a case that couldn't be dismissed or buried. The evidence was too solid, the paper trail too clear. When the story finally broke, it was front-page news. Congressional hearings followed. 2 retired generals faced investigation. The military was forced to acknowledge what had actually happened in that compound 30 years ago. My father's name was cleared. Officially. Publicly. He gave a single interview, standing beside Catherine, explaining what he'd lived through and why he'd disappeared. The response was mixed, some people understanding, others angry that he'd hidden instead of fighting from the beginning. I didn't give interviews. I let the evidence speak for itself and stayed behind the scenes where I was comfortable. On a Saturday morning 6 months after everything broke, my father called and asked if I wanted to meet for breakfast. Not at the diner in Sandy, somewhere new. Neutral ground. I said yes. We sat across from each other in a cafe in Portland, and the silence was less heavy than before. Not comfortable, but bearable. He asked about my work. I asked about Catherine. We talked around the edges of everything that mattered, testing whether we could build something new from the wreckage of what had been. "I don't know if we can have a normal relationship," I said eventually. "Too much time has passed. Too much damage was done." "I know," he agreed. "But maybe we can have something. Not father and daughter the way it should have been, but two people who share a history and are trying to figure out what comes next. Maybe, I said. And meant it. The empty chair at my table wasn't for him to fill. It was for the person I'd been, the 7-year-old girl who'd believed the lies because she had no choice. I'd made space for her grief, acknowledged it, and slowly let it go. What remained was something harder and more honest than what had been there before. Some truths destroy everything they touch. Others clear the ground for something new to grow. I still didn't know which kind this was. But I was learning to live with the uncertainty, to build a life on questions instead of false certainties. My father would never be the dad who tucked me in or taught me to ride a bike. But he could be someone I knew, someone I understood, someone whose choices I could finally contextualize even if I couldn't forgive them completely. That was enough for now. Maybe it would always be enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.